The wire bit into her palm even through the thick leather gloves. But Amelia Gardner did not stop working, not with the storm rolling across the Wyoming plains like the wrath of God himself. Rain pelted her face, mixing with the sweat that had already soaked through her cotton work shirt, and she wondered for perhaps the 100th time that afternoon why her father had chosen this particular stretch of fence line to fail on this particular day. The answer was simple enough. Nothing in Fort Bridger happened according to anyone's plan, least of all hers. She twisted the wire around the post, her muscles burning from 3 hours of work that should have taken 2 men half the time. But there were no men to spare. Her father had taken the ranch hands to move the cattle to higher ground before the storm worsened, leaving her to handle what he called minor repairs. Minor. She would have laughed if she had breath to spare. 3 fence posts had rotted clean through, and the wire had snapped in 4 places. This was a full day's work, and the sky was already darkening with more than just storm clouds. The sound of hoofbeats barely registered over the drumming rain until the horse was nearly upon her. Amelia spun, her hand instinctively going to the rifle she had propped against the nearest standing post. Her fingers were numb from the cold, clumsy, but she managed to grip the stock before she saw the rider clearly. He sat astride a dark bay gelding, rain sluicing off the brim of his hat in steady streams. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with the easy posture of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. He raised one hand slowly, palm out, a gesture of peace that stopped her from raising the rifle any higher. "Did not mean to startle you," he called over the rain. His voice was deep, calm, the kind of voice that carried authority without demanding it. "Saw you from the ridge. Looks like you could use a hand." Amelia's jaw tightened. She was soaked through, exhausted, and in no mood for charity, especially not from a stranger. "I am managing fine." "Yes, I can see that." There was no mockery in his tone, which surprised her. He dismounted, moving with a fluid grace despite his size, and led his horse closer. "Isaiah Nolan, I am passing through looking for work. Your father hiring, not today." She turned back to the fence, wrestling with the wire. It slipped through her wet gloves, snapping back and catching her across the cheek. She hissed in pain but did not stop working. "Here." Isaiah was beside her suddenly, his hands covering hers on the wire. His hands were large, weathered, capable. "Let me." She should have refused. Should have sent him on his way. But her arms were shaking with fatigue and the light was fading fast. She stepped back, watching as he took over with practiced efficiency. He worked in silence, his movements economical and sure. Within minutes, he had secured the wire she had been fighting with for the better part of an hour. "You have done this before," she said, not quite a question. "Once or twice." He moved to the next post, examining the damage. "This one needs replacing entirely. You have supplies." She nodded toward the wagon she had driven out, loaded with posts and wire. He nodded, already moving toward it. Something in his certainty irritated her, but she could not deny the relief flooding through her limbs as he took over the heavy work. They worked side by side as the storm intensified, the rain turning cold enough to sting. He did not try to make conversation, which she appreciated. She was not in the habit of trusting strangers, especially men who appeared out of nowhere offering help. But Isaiah Nolan worked with the kind of focus that spoke of genuine purpose, not ulterior motives. He dug out the rotted posts, set new ones, strung wire with the efficiency of someone who had spent years on a working ranch. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen, broken only by occasional lightning that turned the prairie into a stark landscape of shadows and silver light. Amelia's teeth were chattering despite herself, and she could see that Isaiah was soaked through as thoroughly as she was. "There is a line shack about a mile north," she said, the words coming out before she could reconsider them. "We should wait out the worst of the storm. This lightning is dangerous." He looked at her for a long moment, water streaming down his face, then nodded. "I will follow your lead." The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was dry, and there was a small stove with wood stacked beside it. Amelia had never been more grateful for her father's insistence on keeping the remote shelters stocked. She lit the stove while Isaiah tended to the horses, bringing them into the small lean-to attached to the shack. When he came inside, she had a fire going and had found the emergency supplies: coffee, beans, and a few cans of peaches. It was not much, but her stomach was hollow with hunger. "Coffee," she offered, already pouring water from the pump into the battered pot. "Please." He removed his hat, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair plastered to his head and startling blue eyes that seemed to catch the firelight. A scar ran along his jawline, pale against his tanned skin. He caught her looking and smiled slightly. "Horse kicked me when I was 16. I learned to be more careful around the back end after that." Despite herself, Amelia felt her lips twitch. That must have been quite a lesson. The best ones usually hurt. He settled onto one of the crude benches, his movements betraying exhaustion. "How long have you been running your father's ranch?" "I do not run it. My father does. I just work it, same as anyone else." The defensiveness in her voice surprised her. Isaiah held up his hands. "I meant no offense, just making conversation. You clearly know what you are doing out here." She busied herself with the coffee, uncomfortable with the compliment. Most men in Fort Bridger either dismissed her capabilities entirely or made comments about how she should be finding a husband instead of working cattle and mending fences. Isaiah Nolan had done neither, which unsettled her more than outright dismissal would have. "So you are looking for ranch work?" she asked, changing the subject. "If I can find it. I have been working down in Colorado, but the operation closed. Owner died, and his children sold the land to the railroad." His voice was matter-of-fact, but she heard the regret beneath it. "Figured I would try Wyoming. Heard there was still good ranch country up here." "There is, if you do not mind the winters." Amelia poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing him one. "They will freeze you solid if you are not prepared. I have worked Montana. Wyoming winter cannot be much worse. We will see if you are still saying that come January." They fell into a companionable silence, sipping the bitter coffee and listening to the storm rage outside. The warmth of the fire and the shelter from the rain felt like luxury after hours in the cold. Amelia found herself studying Isaiah when she thought he was not looking. There was a steadiness about him, a quiet competence that she recognized from the best ranch hands she had known. But there was something else too, something in the way he watched the fire, a distance in his eyes that spoke of harder experiences than just working cattle. "You fought," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. His eyes snapped to hers, sharp and assessing. Then he nodded slowly. 2 years in the cavalry, got out in '76 right after Little Bighorn, did not have the stomach for what they were asking us to do." The honesty surprised her. Most men who had served would not admit such things, especially not to a woman they had just met. That must have taken courage. "It took realizing I was on the wrong side of something evil." His voice was flat, final. "I joined up thinking I would be protecting settlers. Turned out I was just helping take land from people who had lived on it for generations. When I figured that out, I left." Amelia nodded slowly. Her own father had similar views, which had made him unpopular among some of the more vocal settlers in Fort Bridger. There are not many who would admit that. There are not many things I am proud of from those years. Being honest about it seems like the least I can do." The storm continued through the night, and they settled into their separate corners of the small shack, wrapped in the musty blankets stored in the supply chest. Amelia lay awake for a long time, listening to the rain and the steady breathing of the stranger across the room. She should have been afraid, alone in the wilderness with a man she did not know. But something about Isaiah Nolan felt safe in a way she could not quite explain. Perhaps it was the calm competence he had shown at the fence line. Perhaps it was the honest way he had spoken about his past. Or perhaps she was simply too exhausted to maintain her usual wariness. When she finally slept, her dreams were troubled, filled with storms and broken fences and blue eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. Morning came gray and wet, the storm having settled into a steady drizzle. They shared a cold breakfast of leftover cornbread from the supplies, neither speaking much. The easy conversation of the night before had been replaced by a mutual awkwardness, as if they both realized they had shared more than intended. "I should get back," Amelia said finally, repacking the supplies. "My father will worry." "Of course." Isaiah was already saddling his horse. "Thank you for the shelter." She nodded, not trusting herself to say more. They rode back to the main ranch buildings in silence, the horses picking their way carefully through the mud-slicked ground. When they reached the barn, her father was waiting, his face creased with worry that smoothed into relief when he saw her. "Amelia, thank God. I was about to ride out looking for you." Thomas Gardner was a big man, weathered by decades of ranch work, but his eyes were kind as they swept over his daughter, checking for injuries. Then his gaze shifted to Isaiah, narrowing with the suspicion of any father faced with a strange man accompanying his daughter. "This is Isaiah Nolan," Amelia said quickly. "He helped me finish the fence line when the storm came in. We sheltered in the north line shack. Did he now?" Thomas's voice was neutral, but Amelia knew that tone. He was assessing, judging, deciding whether this stranger represented threat or opportunity. Isaiah dismounted, meeting Thomas's gaze directly. "Sir, I was looking for work when I came across your daughter struggling with a difficult repair. I offered assistance. Nothing more happened than fence mending and waiting out the weather." The directness seemed to satisfy Thomas somewhat. "You have ranch experience." 15 years, sir. Started as a hand in Texas, worked my way up to foreman in Colorado before the operation closed. "I can provide references if you need them." "References are fine, but I judge a man by his work and his word." Thomas crossed his arms, still studying Isaiah. "You looking for permanent work or just passing through?" "That depends on what is available, sir." "I prefer permanent if the situation is right." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Amelia could practically see him thinking. They were short-handed. 2 of their regular hands had quit the previous month to try their luck at the gold fields, and finding reliable help had been difficult. Isaiah Nolan appeared capable, and her father trusted her judgment enough to value her opinion, even if he would never say so directly. "We can offer room in the bunkhouse, $30 a month and meals," Thomas said finally. "Trial period of 2 weeks. If you work out, we can discuss permanent placement." "Fair, more than fair, sir. Thank you." Isaiah extended his hand and Thomas shook it, the gesture sealing the bargain in the way of men who valued a handshake over any written contract. "Amelia, get yourself inside and dried off. You look half drowned." Thomas's voice was gruff with affection. "Isaiah, come with me. I will show you the bunkhouse and introduce you to the other hands." Amelia watched them walk away, her father already explaining the layout of the ranch and the work routine. She should have felt relieved. The fence was mended, Her father had found a new hand, and she could return to her regular duties. Instead, she felt oddly unsettled, as if something had shifted in a way she could not quite name. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work. Spring was the busiest time on the ranch, with calving and branding and the endless tasks that came with running a successful cattle operation. Amelia saw Isaiah regularly, but always in the context of work. He proved himself quickly, demonstrating the kind of knowledge and skill that came from years of experience. Her father was impressed, which was rare. Thomas Gardner did not give praise easily, but she heard him tell one of the other hands that Isaiah Nolan was the best hire they had made in 5 years. She tried not to watch for him, tried not to notice when he was working nearby, or when he took his meals at the long table in the cook's shack. But she found her eyes seeking him out anyway, drawn by something she could not quite name. He caught her looking once, across the corral where he was breaking a young horse to saddle, and smiled at her. It was a small smile, almost shy, and it made something flutter in her chest that she firmly told herself was nothing more than indigestion from the cook's heavy breakfast. "You are being ridiculous," she muttered to herself, heading back to the house with a basket of eggs from the chicken coop. She was 22 years old, too practical and too busy for schoolgirl nonsense. Isaiah Nolan was just another ranch hand, no different from the half-dozen other men who worked for her father, except he was different and she knew it. It was not just his competence, though that was impressive. It was the way he treated her like an equal, asking her opinion on ranch matters, listening when she spoke instead of dismissing her because of her gender. It was the way he was gentle with the animals, patient with the younger hands, respectful to everyone regardless of their position. It was the quiet way he went about his business, never seeking attention or praise, simply doing what needed to be done with steady reliability. And it was the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, with an expression she could not quite read, but that made her pulse quicken despite her best efforts to remain indifferent. The 2-week trial period ended, and her father officially hired Isaiah on as a permanent hand. To celebrate, the cook made a special dinner, and there was even some whiskey passed around, though Amelia noticed Isaiah drank sparingly. She was helping clear the dishes when he approached her, his hat in his hands. "Miss Gardner, could I speak with you a moment?" Outside, her heart did something complicated in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "Of course." They walked away from the cook's shack, toward the corral where the horses dozed in the evening sun. The air was sweet with the smell of hay and grass, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. It was the kind of evening that made even hard ranch work seem worthwhile. "I wanted to thank you properly," Isaiah said, stopping at the fence and resting his arms on the top rail, "for vouching for me with your father, for giving me a chance that night at the fence line. You earned it yourself. I just introduced you." She stood beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "My father does not keep people on unless they prove themselves. Still, you could have sent me away that night. Most women would have. Most women have more sense than to be mending fences alone in a storm," Amelia said dryly. He laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "I will not argue with that, though I am glad you were, or I might have ridden right past the ranch entirely." They stood in companionable silence, watching the horses. Amelia was acutely aware of him beside her, of the breadth of his shoulders and the way his hands rested easily on the fence, scarred and capable. She should go back inside. It was not proper to be alone with him like this, even with the bunkhouse and main house within shouting distance. But she could not quite make herself move. "Can I ask you something?" Isaiah's voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Why were you out there alone? Your father seems like the type who would insist on safety." He needed everyone else for the cattle. I convinced him I could handle a simple fence repair. She smiled ruefully. I was wrong about the simple part. You were doing fine. It was just more work than one person should tackle alone. That seems to be the story of my life. The words came out more bitter than she intended. Too much work, not enough hands, not enough time. Not enough of anything except responsibility. Isaiah was quiet for a moment. You ever think about doing something else, not ranching? What else is there? She gestured at the land around them. This is my home, my life. I would not know what to do anywhere else. Fair enough. He turned to face her, leaning his hip against the fence. I just wondered. You seem like someone with more dreams than this place might hold. The observation was too close, too accurate. Amelia felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she disliked intensely. I should go in. Early start tomorrow. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Amelia, Miss Gardner, I am sorry if I overstepped. I just wanted you to know that I see you, not just as the ranch owner's daughter. I see you. She looked back at him, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. No one had ever looked at her quite like that before, as if she were someone worth really seeing, worth understanding beyond her utility and her role. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. Good night, Isaiah. She managed to keep her voice steady, then fled back to the house before he could say anything else that would shake her carefully maintained composure. Summer arrived in full force, bringing long days and short nights. The ranch work was relentless, and everyone was too busy to think about much beyond the immediate tasks. But Amelia found herself increasingly aware of Isaiah, of the small ways their lives intersected throughout each day. He would catch her eye across the breakfast table and smile. He would appear beside her when she was struggling with a stubborn gait or a heavy feed sack, offering help without making her feel diminished. He would linger after dinner sometimes, talking with her father about cattle prices and weather predictions, but his attention would drift to her whenever she entered the room. Her father noticed, of course. Thomas Gardner might be focused on his ranch, but he was not blind to the growing connection between his daughter and his new hand. One evening he called her into his study, his face serious. Amelia, sit down. We need to talk. She sat, her stomach knotting with anxiety. Her father was not one for serious talks unless something was genuinely wrong. I see how Isaiah Nolan looks at you, Thomas said without preamble, and I see how you look at him. Before this goes any further, I need to know your feelings on the matter. Amelia's face heated. Father, I do not know what you mean. Do not play coy with me, girl. You are too smart for that. His voice was gentle despite the directness. I like Isaiah. He is a good worker and an honest man, but I will not have you hurt or your reputation damaged. If he has intentions, I need to know they are honorable. We have barely spoken beyond ranch business, Amelia protested, though even she could hear how weak the protest sounded. That may be true, but intentions do not require much talking. Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying her. You are 22 years old. I am not so old-fashioned that I think you need my permission to take an interest in someone, but I am your father and I will protect you, so I am asking. Do you have feelings for Isaiah Nolan? The question hung in the air between them. Amelia could lie. She could deny what had been growing steadily since that rain-soaked night at the fence line. But her father deserved the truth, and maybe she needed to say it out loud to understand it herself. I think I might, she said finally, the words barely above a whisper. I did not mean to. I was not looking for it, but yes, I think I do. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I will speak to him. Make sure his intentions are what they should be. If they are, I have no objection to him courting you properly. If they are not, he will be off this ranch before sunset. Understood? "Father, that is not necessary. I can handle my own affairs." "I know you can. But you are still my daughter and I will still look out for you. That is not going to change just because you are grown." He stood, signaling the conversation was over. "Now go on. I am sure you have work waiting." Amelia left the study in a daze, her mind spinning. She did not know whether to be mortified, grateful, or furious. Probably all three. She went through the motions of her evening chores, feeding the chickens and checking the garden, but her thoughts were elsewhere. What would her father say to Isaiah? What would Isaiah say in return? Did he even have intentions, or had she imagined the connection between them? She had her answer the next evening. Isaiah found her in the barn, where she was brushing down her mare after a long ride checking the north pastures. He looked nervous, his hat in his hands, his expression both hopeful and uncertain. "Your father spoke to me," he said without preamble. "I know, I am sorry, he should not have interfered." Amelia kept brushing, not trusting herself to look at him. "I am glad he did. It saved me trying to figure out how to approach you myself." Isaiah moved closer, stopping just outside the stall. "Amelia, I know I am just a ranch hand with no property and little to my name. But your father gave me permission to speak to you directly, and I am going to take the chance before I lose my nerve entirely." Now she did look at him, her hand stilling on the brush. He met her eyes, and she saw vulnerability there that matched her own. "I have been drawn to you since that night at the fence," he continued, his voice steady despite the nerves. "You were out there in the storm, soaked through and exhausted, but you kept working. You have this strength, this determination, that I have never seen in anyone else. And the more I have gotten to know you these past months, the more I have come to admire you, not just your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, the way you care for this ranch and everyone on it. I would like permission to court you properly, to see if what I am feeling might be something you feel too." Amelia's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. All the practical objections crowded her mind. She barely knew him. It had only been a few months. Relationships between ranch owners' daughters and hired hands rarely worked out well, but beneath all the practical concerns was a simpler truth. She wanted this. She wanted to see where this connection might lead. "Yes," she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. "I would like that." The smile that broke across Isaiah's face was like sunrise, bright and warming. "Really? You are sure? Do not make me repeat myself, or I might reconsider." But she was smiling too, unable to help herself. He laughed, relief and joy mixing in the sound. "Then I will not keep you any longer tonight. But tomorrow, after chores, would you ride with me? I found a spot up in the hills with a view of the whole valley. I would like to show you." "That sounds perfect." He left then, whistling as he walked back to the bunkhouse, and Amelia returned to brushing her horse with hands that trembled slightly. She felt like she was standing at the edge of something vast and unknown, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The courtship that followed was necessarily circumspect. They were both busy with ranch work, and propriety demanded they not be alone together too often or too long. But they found moments together, riding out to check fences, sharing meals at the big table with her father present, walking in the evening after dinner when the heat of the day had faded. Isaiah was a patient suitor, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He held her hand as they walked. He told her stories of his life before Fort Bridger, of the places he had seen and the things he had learned. He listened when she talked about her dreams for the ranch, about wanting to improve their breeding stock and experiment with different grazing patterns. He treated her ideas with respect, asked thoughtful questions, and offered suggestions without trying to take over or diminish her vision. Slowly, carefully, Amelia felt her walls coming down. She had spent so long protecting herself, staying focused on work and responsibility, that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. Isaiah was gentle with her emerging trust, and that gentleness made her trust him more. One evening in late August, they were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the mountains. Her father was inside going over the ranch accounts, leaving them alone but within calling distance. Isaiah was holding her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on her palm. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "About why I left Colorado." Amelia tensed slightly. She knew there was more to his story than he had initially shared. "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to. I want to. You deserve to know." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I told you the ranch closed because the owner died. That is true. What I did not tell you is that I was engaged to his daughter, had been for 6 months." The words hit Amelia like cold water. She tried to pull her hand back, but he held it gently, not restraining but asking her to wait to listen. "Her name was Catherine. We grew up on neighboring properties, knew each other our whole lives. Everyone expected us to marry, including us. When her father offered me the foreman position, it seemed like everything was falling into place. We would marry, I would run the ranch, eventually take it over." He paused, his jaw tight. "Then her father died suddenly, and her brother came out from Boston for the funeral. He convinced Catherine to sell the ranch to the railroad for a substantial sum and move back east with him. She broke our engagement and left within a month. Isaiah, I am so sorry." Amelia's anger on his behalf surprised her with its intensity. "I was devastated at first," he admitted. "But as time passed, I realized something. I was hurt more by losing the ranch and the life I thought I would have than by losing Catherine herself. We were comfortable together, familiar, but we were not in love. Not really. It took losing her to understand that. Why are you telling me this now?" He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "Because I need you to understand the difference. What I feel for you is not comfortable or familiar or expected. It is terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected. When I look at you, my heart races. When I am with you, I feel more alive than I ever did in all those years with Catherine. This is real, Amelia. What is growing between us is real, and I needed you to know that I know the difference." Amelia's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her with such raw honesty, such vulnerability. "I am scared," she whispered. "I have never felt like this before. I do not know what to do with it." "Neither do I," Isaiah admitted, "but I think we figure it out together if you are willing." "I am willing." She squeezed his hand. "I am terrified, but I am willing." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and sweet, and it made her heart flutter in a way that no longer frightened her quite so much. The summer faded into fall, and their relationship deepened. Her father watched with approval, commenting once that Isaiah Nolan was exactly the kind of man he had hoped his daughter would choose. The other ranch hands accepted the courtship with good-natured ribbing, and Isaiah took their jokes with humor and grace. But Fort Bridger was a small community, and not everyone was pleased with the match. A few of the town women made snide comments about Amelia taking up with a drifter. Jacob Morrison, who owned the neighboring ranch, made his displeasure known more directly. He had been courting Amelia on and off for years, never quite giving up despite her repeated rejections. He cornered Isaiah one day at the feed store in town, his face red with anger and whiskey. "You think you can just ride in here and take what should be mine?" Jacob's voice was loud enough to draw attention from others in the store. "Amelia Gardner was supposed to marry me. Our families have been planning it for years." Isaiah kept his voice calm, non-confrontational. "I think Amelia makes her own decisions about who she spends time with." If she wanted to marry you, she would have accepted one of your proposals. She just needs time, needs to realize that a ranch hand with no prospects is not going to give her the life she deserves. Jacob stepped closer, aggressive. You should move on, Nolan. Find some girl more suited to your station. I think this conversation is over. Isaiah turned to leave, but Jacob grabbed his arm, spinning him back around. I am not done talking to you. Yes, you are. The voice came from behind them. Amelia stood in the doorway of the feed store, her eyes flashing with fury. She stalked toward them, and Jacob had the grace to look slightly ashamed. Jacob Morrison, you listen to me very carefully. I have told you no more times than I can count. I am not interested in marrying you. I never have been. The only person who seems to think our families have been planning a marriage is you. My father has never agreed to any such thing, and neither have I. So you leave Isaiah alone, and you leave me alone, or I will make sure everyone in Fort Bridger knows exactly what kind of man you are. Amelia, I just want what is best for you. Jacob's tone turned wheedling. Your father's ranch and mine together would make the largest operation in the county. You must see the sense in it. What I see is a man who values land more than people, who thinks he can bully his way into getting what he wants. She stepped closer to Isaiah, a statement of solidarity. Isaiah treats me with respect. He listens to me. He values my opinions and my capabilities. That is worth more than all the land in Wyoming. Now leave us alone. She took Isaiah's arm and led him out of the store, her head high despite the curious stares of the other customers. Outside, in the bright afternoon sun, Isaiah let out a long breath. That was impressive. And slightly terrifying. He looked down at her, admiration clear on his face. I was about to handle it, but I am not going to lie, watching you put him in his place was far more satisfying. Jacob Morrison has been a thorn in my side since we were children. He is a bully and a fool. She was still angry, her hands shaking slightly. I am sorry he confronted you. I am not. It gave you a chance to make your feelings very clear. Isaiah covered her hand with his where it rested on his arm. Though I could not help but notice, you said I treat you with respect and listen to you. Not that you love me. Amelia's breath caught. They had not spoken of love yet, though it had been hovering between them for weeks now. I think that conversation should happen somewhere more private than Main Street. Agreed. Come on. Let us get the supplies loaded and get back to the ranch. They rode back in the wagon, sitting close together despite propriety. The ranch hands could unload the supplies. Amelia directed Isaiah to drive past the main buildings, up to a small rise where a stand of cottonwoods provided shade and privacy. It was one of her favorite spots on the ranch, a place she came when she needed to think. Isaiah helped her down from the wagon, and they stood facing each other under the trees. The leaves were turning gold with autumn, and the air had the crisp edge that promised winter was not far off. You are right, Amelia said, her heart pounding. I did not tell Jacob that I love you. That is because I had not said it to you first, and it seemed wrong to tell him before telling you. Isaiah went very still. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I love you, Isaiah Nolan. I think I started falling for you that night at the fence line when you helped me without expecting anything in return. And I have been falling steadily ever since. You are kind and patient and good. You make me laugh. You make me feel like I can be myself instead of always playing the role of the capable ranch woman. With you, I am just Amelia, and I love you for that. The joy that spread across his face was beautiful to see. He reached for her, cupping her face gently in his calloused hands. I love you too. I have been wanting to say it for weeks, but I was afraid of rushing you. Amelia Gardner, you are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. You are strong and smart and brave. You face down storms and stubborn cattle and bullies like Jacob Morrison without flinching. You are everything I never knew I was looking for. I love you with everything I am." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise sealed between them. Amelia melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a long moment the world consisted only of the two of them. The taste of his lips, the warmth of his embrace, the rightness of being exactly where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Isaiah rested his forehead against hers, his hands still framing her face. "I want to marry you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it is fast. I know I should wait longer, do this properly. But I want to marry you, build a life with you, wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Will you think about it? I am not asking now, not officially, just asking you to think about whether that is something you might want too. I do not need to think about it." Amelia's voice was clear, certain. "Yes. When you are ready to ask properly, the answer will be yes." He kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and passion and years stretching out before them. When they finally returned to the ranch, hand in hand, her father took one look at their faces and started smiling. Isaiah asked her to marry him officially a week later, in front of her father and all the ranch hands, presenting her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. Amelia said yes with tears streaming down her face, and the ranch erupted in cheers and congratulations. They were married 6 weeks later in early November in the small church in Fort Bridger. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, and when Isaiah kissed her as his wife, Amelia felt like her heart might burst with happiness. They made their home in a small house on the ranch property that Thomas had built for them as a wedding present. It was not large, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. Isaiah continued to work as foreman, and her father began the process of slowly turning over more and more responsibility to him, with the understanding that eventually the ranch would belong to Amelia and Isaiah together. The first year of marriage had its challenges. They had to learn to live together, to navigate disagreements and different opinions about how things should be done. But they approached their marriage the same way they had approached their courtship, with patience, communication, and genuine love. When they fought, they talked it through. When they struggled, they supported each other, and when they succeeded, they celebrated together. Winter came hard that year, just as Amelia had warned Isaiah it would. The temperatures plummeted and snow piled higher than the fence posts. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking about the future, making plans for the ranch and their life together. Isaiah proved himself invaluable during the harsh months, his experience and steady temperament helping them get through with minimal losses. Spring brought renewal and new challenges. Amelia discovered she was pregnant, just as the calving season was beginning. Isaiah was overjoyed and immediately became absurdly overprotective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. She tolerated his concern for about 2 days before sitting him down for a frank conversation about how she was pregnant, not fragile, and fully intended to continue working until she physically could not. "I understand you are worried," she said, holding his hand across the kitchen table. "But you need to trust me to know my own limits. I promise I will not do anything to risk our baby, but I also need to keep working, keep being useful. It is who I am." Isaiah struggled with it, but he respected her wishes. They found compromises. He would lift the heavy things, and she would handle the tasks that required less strength but more patience. They worked together through the spring, preparing for the baby that would arrive in late summer. Thomas Gardner was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He started making plans immediately, talking about building an addition onto their house and buying a new bull to improve their breeding stock, so the baby would inherit an even stronger operation. The baby came in August, during another storm. Amelia labored through the night with Isaiah beside her, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. The local midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Jenkins, handled the delivery with professional calm. When their son finally entered the world, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Isaiah wept openly. "He is beautiful," he said, cradling the tiny infant with a gentleness that made Amelia fall in love with him all over again. Just like his mother. They named him Thomas Gardner Nolan, after her father. Thomas Sr. was so touched he had to leave the room to compose himself. Little Tommy, as they called him, became the heart of the household. He was a good baby, curious and alert, with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Amelia discovered that she loved motherhood in a way she had not expected. She had worried that she would feel trapped, confined to the house instead of working the ranch. But Isaiah made sure she stayed involved, bringing Tommy out to the barn in a sling so she could work with the horses she loved. Her father hired a young woman from town to help with the house, and with Tommy, freeing Amelia to continue her ranch work. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Tommy grew from baby to toddler to young boy, trailing after his father and grandfather, learning the ranch work from the time he could walk. Amelia and Isaiah expanded the ranch, buying adjacent property when it became available, improving their herd, building a reputation for quality cattle that reached beyond Wyoming. When Tommy was 3, Amelia became pregnant again. This time, they had twin daughters, Rose and Lily, who arrived a month early and scared everyone half to death. But both girls were fighters, strong and healthy, and they brought chaos and joy in equal measure to the household. Thomas Sr., now in his 60s, officially turned over ownership of the ranch to Amelia and Isaiah when the twins were a year old. He stayed on, still working, still offering advice, but the ranch was now officially the Nolan operation. Isaiah refused to change the name, insisting it would always be the Gardner Ranch in honor of the man who had given him a chance that rainy night so many years ago. They prospered. Not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and market fluctuations, but they faced everything together. Isaiah proved to be not just a capable rancher, but a brilliant businessman, finding new markets for their cattle and negotiating deals that kept them profitable even in lean years. Amelia managed the day-to-day operations with efficiency and care, and together, they became known as one of the most successful ranching couples in Wyoming. Tommy grew into a serious young boy who loved the ranch as much as his parents and grandfather did. He was only 10 when his grandfather Thomas passed peacefully in his sleep, but he carried his grandfather's name and memory with pride. The twins were wild and adventurous, more interested in racing horses and climbing trees than learning the household skills their mother attempted to teach them. Amelia let them be, remembering her own tomboy childhood and knowing they would find their own paths in time. When Amelia was 35, she gave birth to one more child, a son they named Daniel. He was unexpected but deeply welcomed, a late blessing that completed their family. Daniel was quieter than his siblings, thoughtful and gentle, with a love for books and learning that suggested he might not follow his brother into ranching. Isaiah and Amelia encouraged all their children to follow their own interests, knowing that the ranch would continue as long as at least one of them wanted it, and would survive in other forms if none of them did. The years turned the Nolan Ranch into a Fort Bridger institution. People pointed to them as an example of what hard work and partnership could achieve. Young couples starting out would sometimes ride up to ask Isaiah and Amelia for advice, and they were always generous with their time and knowledge. Isaiah's hair started turning silver at the temples, making him look distinguished rather than old. Amelia found she loved the silver streaks, loved the lines that appeared around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun and smiling at her across the dinner table. They were aging together, and she found beauty in that too. When Tommy was 18, he announced that he wanted to attend agricultural college in Montana. Amelia's heart broke a little at the thought of him leaving, but she and Isaiah supported his decision. Education would make him an even better rancher, and he had promised to return. The twins, now 15, were already making noises about staying on the ranch, about expanding into horse breeding as well as cattle. Daniel, at 8, was still young enough that his future remained unwritten. They stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. Isaiah's arm was around Amelia's waist, and she leaned into him the way she had been doing for 20 years of marriage. "You ever think about that night?" Isaiah asked quietly. "When I rode up and found you mending fences in the rain. I think about it all the time." Amelia looked up at him, seeing the boy who had offered help to a stranger and the man who had become her everything. "I think about how if the storm had been a little less severe, or if you had taken a different road, or if I had sent you away, none of this would exist. Our children would not exist. This life would not exist. That terrifies me sometimes," Isaiah admitted. "How much of this was chance? How easily I could have missed you. But you did not. You found me and I let you help and we built this together." She turned to face him fully, taking his hands in hers. "I love you, Isaiah Nolan. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you for every day we have left." He kissed her, soft and familiar after 20 years, but still full of the passion that had drawn them together. "I love you too. You gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me a life worth living. We gave each other everything," she corrected. "That is what partnership means." The twins came bursting out of the house, arguing about something related to horse breeding, and Daniel followed more slowly, reading as he walked. Tommy would be home for Christmas, bringing stories of college and new ideas for the ranch. The ranch hands would be gathering in the bunkhouse for evening cards. The cattle would need checking before full dark. Life would go on in its beautiful, ordinary way. But for just a moment longer, Amelia and Isaiah stood together on their porch, watching their children and their land, grateful for the storm that had brought them together, and the years that had proven their love could weather anything. The children eventually settled, the twins' argument resolving itself the way their disputes usually did, with both of them claiming victory and immediately moving on to the next topic. Daniel looked up from his book long enough to ask his father about the constellations starting to appear in the darkening sky, and Isaiah patiently pointed them out, telling the same stories his own father had told him as a boy. Amelia watched them with a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what she had never known to dream of when she was younger, working herself to exhaustion to keep her father's ranch running, convinced that her life would always be defined by duty and work rather than love and family. The next morning brought the first real cold snap of autumn. Amelia woke to frost on the windows, and Isaiah already up, stoking the fire to warm the house before the children woke. She watched him from the bed for a moment, admiring the efficiency of his movements, the way he still moved with the grace of someone comfortable in his body despite approaching 40. "I can feel you staring," he said without turning around, amusement in his voice. Cannot a wife admire her husband? She climbed out of bed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. A wife can do whatever she pleases. He straightened, turning to pull her into his arms. "Especially when she looks at me like that." "Like what?" "Like I am something precious." Even after all these years, even when you have seen me at my worst, you still look at me like that. I never take it for granted." She reached up to kiss him, soft and sweet. "Good. You should not." The sound of small feet running down the hall interrupted them. Daniel burst into the room, his hair standing up in all directions, his face alight with excitement. "Father, Mother, come look. It snowed during the night, just a little but enough." They followed him to the window, and sure enough, a light dusting of white covered the ground, just enough to paint the world in shades of silver. It would melt by noon, but for now it was beautiful. "Winter is coming early this year," Isaiah observed. "We should move the cattle to the lower pastures sooner than planned." "I will ride out this morning and make an assessment," Amelia said. After all these years, they still divided the ranch work with the same easy partnership they had established early in their marriage. The twins appeared, drawn by Daniel's excitement, and immediately started planning how to convince their parents to let them take the horses out in the snow. Isaiah negotiated with them while Amelia dressed and prepared for the day, and by the time she came down for breakfast, he had extracted promises of finished chores in exchange for riding time. Over the next few weeks, they prepared the ranch for winter. The cattle were moved, supplies were laid in. The equipment was checked and repaired. The bunkhouse was winterized, extra wood cut and stacked. It was the same routine they followed every year, familiar and comforting in its predictability. Tommy came home for Christmas as promised, full of new ideas and energy. He had grown in the few months away, not just in height but in confidence and maturity. He and Isaiah spent hours discussing new techniques he had learned, new theories about cattle breeding and land management. Amelia listened with pride, knowing that the ranch's future was secure in her son's capable hands. Christmas itself was loud and chaotic and perfect. They invited the ranch hands to share Christmas dinner, a tradition Amelia had started years ago. The house was full of laughter and food and warmth. The twins performed a dramatic reading of the Christmas story that was more comedy than sacred text. Daniel gave everyone books he had selected carefully for their interests. Tommy presented his parents with a framed photograph of the three of them taken at his college, looking proud and grown up in his new suit. Isaiah and Amelia exchanged gifts privately, later that night after the children had finally collapsed into bed. He gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal for recording ranch records and her thoughts. She gave him a new saddle custom-made to his specifications. But the real gift, as always, was simply this: another year together, another Christmas as a family, another marker in a life well lived. As winter deepened, they settled into the slower pace the season demanded. There was still work to be done, animals to tend, equipment to repair, accounts to manage, but the frantic urgency of spring through fall eased. There was time for evenings by the fire, for reading and talking and teaching the children. Time for Amelia and Isaiah to simply be together, to remember who they were beyond ranch managers and parents. One evening, with the children in bed and the house quiet except for the crackling fire, Isaiah pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I found this today," he said, handing it to her, "going through some old papers in the barn." Amelia unfolded it carefully. It was a list in her father's handwriting, dated nearly 20 years ago. A list of repairs needed on the ranch. At the bottom, in her own younger handwriting, she had added, "North fence line priority." "The fence I was mending that day," she whispered, running her finger over the faded ink. "The fence that brought me to you." Isaiah moved closer on the settee they were sharing. "I never thanked your father properly for leaving you short-handed that day. He would have laughed at that." Amelia smiled at the memory of her father, gone now 5 years but still so present in the ranch and the family he had built. He used to say that sometimes the worst inconveniences turn out to be the greatest blessings. He was right. Isaiah took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I rode up to this ranch with nothing but a horse and my saddle. You gave me everything. You gave me everything," she countered. "A partner, a love I never thought I would find, children, a life that is so much richer than anything I imagined for myself. Then we are both lucky." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm the way he had done thousands of times over their years together. "And I would do it all again. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it. Even the winter of '83 when we nearly lost half the herd, even that. Because we got through it together. Even the time the twins convinced Daniel he could fly and he broke his arm jumping off the barn roof." Isaiah winced at the memory. "Even that, though I could have done without the terror of seeing my son falling. Even Jacob Morrison's continued attempts to convince the town that I married beneath myself. Especially that, because every time he says it, you defend me with the ferocity of a mother bear. It is extremely attractive." Amelia laughed, the sound bright and young despite the silver starting to thread through her dark hair. "You are ridiculous. I am lucky." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "I am the luckiest man in Wyoming, possibly the world." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and heavy. They would wake to a world transformed, to work that would need doing, to children who would need tending. But for now, they simply sat together. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. Spring came, as it always did, with mud and new calves, and the return of warmer weather. Tommy finished his first year of college and returned home for the summer, immediately immersing himself in ranch work. The twins, now 16, had become genuinely useful hands, and Isaiah started paying them wages like the other workers. Daniel turned 9 and showed an interest in the business side of ranching, spending hours poring over the account books with his mother. That summer, a young man rode up to the ranch looking for work. He was dusty from travel, clearly inexperienced but willing, and Isaiah hired him on the spot. Watching them, Amelia was transported back to that rainy night so many years ago. She caught Isaiah's eye, and he smiled, understanding written clearly on his face. They were paying forward the chance that had been given, offering opportunity to someone who needed it. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Tommy graduated from college and returned to the ranch permanently, taking on more and more responsibility. He courted and married a smart, capable young woman named Elizabeth from Fort Bridger, and they built their own house on ranch property. When they had their first child, making Amelia and Isaiah grandparents, it felt like the completion of a circle. The twins proved to have a genuine gift for horse breeding. They developed a breeding program that became renowned throughout Wyoming, supplying working horses to ranches and cavalry units alike. They were different from each other in many ways. Rose was bold and outgoing, Lily more thoughtful and reserved, but they worked together with a synchronicity that reminded everyone of their parents. Daniel, as predicted, did not become a rancher. He went east for school, studying law, but he never forgot his roots. He returned regularly, bringing his sharp mind to bear on the legal and business challenges the ranch faced. When he married, he chose a woman who loved books as much as he did, and they settled in Cheyenne where he could practice law while still being close enough to visit frequently. Isaiah and Amelia watched their children build their own lives with pride and a bittersweet awareness of time passing. They were in their 40s now, no longer young but not yet old, in that strange middle place where the future begins to look shorter than the past. One autumn evening, nearly 25 years after that first meeting in the rain, they rode out together to the spot where they had worked on the fence line. It was hard to tell exactly where it had been. The posts had been replaced multiple times over the years, and the land looked different in every season. But they dismounted and walked together, remembering. "I was so stubborn that night," Amelia said, running her hand along the wire. "I almost sent you away. You were not stubborn. You were independent and strong. That is what drew me to you." Isaiah came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Though I admit, I am glad you accepted my help. I wonder who I would have been if you had not ridden up that night." She turned in his arms to face him. "Would I have stayed alone, eventually married someone like Jacob Morrison out of practicality, stayed my father's helper instead of becoming a full partner in running this ranch? I do not think you could have ever been just anyone's helper. You are too much yourself for that." He kissed her forehead. "But I am grateful every day that we will never have to know, that we found each other and chose each other and built this life together." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and they both laughed at the appropriateness. Another storm was rolling in, though this one was mild compared to the one that had brought them together. "Should we race back?" Amelia asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You are going to cheat and take the shorter path through the creek. Probably. Are you going to complain about it?" "Never." He kissed her quickly. "Last one back does the dishes for a week." They mounted and rode hard across the prairie, racing the storm and each other. Amelia did take the shortcut through the creek, and Isaiah followed her, both of them arriving at the barn soaked and laughing like teenagers. The ranch hands shook their heads with affectionate amusement, long since used to the boss and his wife's occasional lapses into undignified behavior. More years passed. Tommy and Elizabeth had 3 children, and the ranch house that had once felt spacious became crowded with grandchildren during holidays and summers. The twins both married, Rose to a horse trainer from Montana and Lily to a neighboring rancher's son. Daniel and his wife had 2 quiet, bookish children who treated trips to the ranch like anthropological expeditions to a foreign culture. Isaiah's hair went fully silver, and Amelia's followed more slowly. They both moved a little more carefully in the mornings, joints protesting the years of hard work. But they were healthy and active, still running the ranch together, though increasingly they let Tommy take the lead on major decisions. When Amelia turned 50, Isaiah planned a celebration that brought together everyone who mattered to them. Children and grandchildren, ranch hands past and present, friends from Fort Bridger and beyond. They roasted cattle and danced under the stars, and Isaiah gave a speech that made Amelia cry. 27 years ago, he said, his arm around his wife, I rode up on a woman mending fences alone in a storm. I offered to help, and she let me. It was the smartest thing I ever did, and agreeing to let me stay was the kindest thing she ever did. Everything good in my life stems from that moment. This ranch, these children, these grandchildren, this family we have built. All of it started because Amelia Gardner saw past the dusty stranger and gave me a chance. I love you, Amelia Nolan. Thank you for 27 years. I am looking forward to 27 more. The crowd cheered, and their children and grandchildren surrounded them, and Amelia looked around at the life they had created and felt nothing but gratitude. But time, relentless and unstoppable, continued its march. Thomas Gardner Nolan, their firstborn son, took over full operation of the ranch when Isaiah and Amelia were both in their late 50s. It was time, they both acknowledged, to step back and let the next generation lead. They moved into a smaller house on the property, one that required less maintenance, and settled into a new rhythm of life. Amelia took up painting, something she had always wanted to try but never had time for. She was not particularly talented, but she enjoyed it, capturing the landscape she loved in imperfect watercolors. Isaiah read voraciously, all the books he had never had time for during the working years. They traveled a little, taking the train to San Francisco and Denver, seeing the world beyond Wyoming. But they always came back to Fort Bridger, to the ranch, to the land that had been witness to their love story. They watched their grandchildren grow, offering advice when asked, but mostly just enjoying the freedom to be grandparents rather than parents, to spoil and indulge without the responsibility of discipline. Isaiah's health began to decline when he was 63. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down of a body that had worked hard for a lifetime. His heart was not as strong as it once was, and the doctor from Fort Bridger prescribed rest and less physical labor. Isaiah bore the limitations with surprising grace, though Amelia caught him sometimes staring out at the ranch with longing. "I am not ready to be done yet," he admitted to her one evening. "I know, but we do not always get to choose when we are done. We only get to choose how we handle it." She took his hand. "You have already built everything you needed to build. The ranch is strong. Our children are happy and settled. We have grandchildren who will carry on the legacy. You can rest now." "I do not want to rest. I want to work beside you like we always have. We can still work. Just differently." She smiled at him. "Help me with my painting. Teach the grandchildren to read the stars. Tell stories about the old days. That is work too. It is just a different kind." He pulled her close, and they sat together watching the sun set over the land they had tended for 4 decades. "I love you, Amelia. That has been the constant in my life. Everything else has changed, but that never has. It never will." She kissed him softly. "We have years yet, Isaiah Nolan, years and years," and they did. Isaiah's decline was slow, giving them time to savor each day. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by family, a gathering so large they had to hold it in the barn. Their great-grandchildren ran underfoot, and Isaiah held the newest one, born just weeks before, with a tenderness that made Amelia's heart ache with love. Isaiah passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, with Amelia beside him in the bed they had shared for 43 years. She woke at dawn and knew before she opened her eyes that he was gone. The stillness was different somehow, the room emptier than it should have been. The grief was devastating and profound. For the first time in more than 4 decades, she was truly alone. Her children came immediately, surrounding her with love and support. Tommy handled the funeral arrangements. The twins barely left her side. Daniel arrived from Cheyenne and stayed for weeks. Fort Bridger turned out in force for Isaiah Nolan's funeral. The church overflowed with ranchers and townspeople, business associates and friends, ranch hands and their families. Person after person stood to share stories of Isaiah's kindness, his integrity, his generosity. Amelia listened through her tears, proud and heartbroken in equal measure. She spoke last, standing at the pulpit with her children and grandchildren behind her. "Isaiah rode up to this ranch 43 years ago with nothing but a horse and his skills," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I was mending fences alone in the rain. He offered to help and I let him. He never left. Not really. Oh, his body is gone, but he is still here. In this ranch that he helped build, in our children and grandchildren, in the fences that still stand and the cattle that still graze, in every sunset over the mountains and every storm that rolls across the prairie. He never left, and he never will. This land holds him now, just as it has held all of us, and I find comfort in that. The burial was in the small cemetery on the ranch property, where her father already lay. Tommy and the ranch hands lowered the casket while Amelia stood with her children, looking out at the land that had been her life. She could feel Isaiah beside her, almost hear his voice on the wind. Not gone, just changed. The weeks after the funeral were hard. Amelia moved through the house they had shared, surrounded by memories. His coat still hung by the door. His coffee cup sat in the drain board. His reading chair held the impression of his body. She could not bring herself to move any of it, not yet. But slowly, with the support of her children and the passage of time, she began to find her way forward. She returned to her painting with new intensity, trying to capture the landscapes Isaiah had loved. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather. She walked the ranch property, remembering all the work they had done together, all the dreams they had built. On what would have been their 45th wedding anniversary, Amelia rode out to the fence line where they had met. It had been years since she had been on a horse, but she managed, driven by a need to return to the beginning. The fence posts were new, the wire tight and strong, maintained by the next generation. But the land was the same, the view unchanged. She dismounted carefully, her movements stiff with age, and stood where she thought she had been standing that rainy night so long ago. She could almost see it, her younger self, stubborn and exhausted, fighting with the fence. Isaiah riding up out of the storm, offering help without expectation. "I miss you," she said to the wind, to the land, to the sky. "Every day I miss you. But you were right, all those years ago when we stood on our porch and talked about chance. We found each other. Against all odds, we found each other and built something beautiful. Thank you for riding up that day. Thank you for staying. Thank you for 43 years of love." The wind picked up, warm for October, and she felt it wrap around her like an embrace. Fanciful, perhaps, to imagine it was Isaiah answering, but she chose to believe it anyway. Amelia lived another 12 years, surrounded by family and the land she loved. She watched more grandchildren grow into adults, welcomed great-great-grandchildren, and saw the ranch continue to prosper under Tommy's leadership. She painted and told stories and remained sharp and engaged until the very end. When she passed at the age of 80, peacefully in her sleep, just as Isaiah had, the family buried her next to him on the ranch property. The entire community mourned the loss of a woman who had become a legend in her own right, not just as Isaiah Nolan's wife, but as a rancher, businesswoman, and pioneer. But the story did not end there. It lived on in the ranch that still bore the Gardner name, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. It lived on in the stories told around Fort Bridger about the cowboy who rode up in the rain and the woman who let him help. It lived on in the land itself, holding their memory in its soil and grass and endless sky. And on stormy nights when the rain came down hard and the lightning flashed across the prairie, the ranch hands swore they could sometimes see two figures on the fence line, working side by side, bound together by love that transcended even death. Whether it was truth or legend hardly mattered. Some love stories are too powerful to end with something as simple as mortality. The Nolan Ranch continued through generations, each one adding to the foundation Isaiah and Amelia had built. The land they had worked so hard to maintain prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. And always, in the house and the barn and the bunkhouse, the story was told of the cowboy who rode up in the rain and never left, and the woman who gave him a chance and found love. It was a simple story, really. Boy meets girl. They work together, fall in love, build a life. But simple stories, lived with integrity and passion and commitment, become extraordinary over time. They become the foundation upon which everything else is built. They become legend. And so the story of Isaiah and Amelia lived on, a testament to the power of chance meetings and the courage to open your heart to a stranger in a storm. It was a love story, yes, but it was also a story about partnership and respect, about building something lasting together, about choosing each other every day for a lifetime. The fence line where they met still stands, maintained by their descendants who know its significance. And sometimes, on anniversary dates or special occasions, the family still rides out there together, standing where it all began, remembering the two people who started it all with nothing but wire and rain and willingness to accept help from a stranger. That is the true legacy of Amelia Gardner and Isaiah Nolan. Not just the land or the cattle or the successful ranch, but the love that made it all possible. The love that proved when the right two people find each other, when they work together as true partners, when they face life's storms side by side, they can build something that lasts far beyond their own lifetimes. And if you ever find yourself near Fort Bridger, Wyoming, and you stop by the Nolan Ranch, ask about the fence line. Ask about the storm. Ask about the cowboy who rode up and never left. The current generation will smile and tell you the story, just as their parents told them and their grandparents before that. Because some stories are too important to forget, too powerful to let fade. This is one of those stories. A love story. A Wyoming story. A story about fences and rain and the beautiful unpredictability of life. A story that began with a simple offer of help and became a legacy that would last for generations. It is a story about coming home to a place you never knew existed until you found the right person to share it with. It is a story about building something that matters, not just for yourself, but for those who will come after. It is a story about love in its truest, deepest form, patient and kind, enduring and strong, tested by time and emerging victorious. It is, ultimately, a story about two people who mended more than fences that rainy night. They mended each other's loneliness, filled each other's dreams, and built a life that proved love is not just about the grand gestures or passionate declarations. It is about showing up day after day, working side by side, choosing partnership over independence, together over alone. That is the story of Isaiah and Amelia Nolan. The cowboy who rode up in the rain and never left. The woman who let him help and found love. And the life they built together on the Wyoming prairie, a life that continues to inspire and guide their family generations later. It is a good story, a true story in all the ways that matter. And it is finished now, complete and whole, a closed circle of love that began and ended on the same piece of land, under the same endless western sky.